Hey, Isabella. Canada was founded in 1867. What year do you think that under the Canadian Constitution, women were officially considered people?
Well, I feel like women have always been people, right? So I want to just say 1867.
Hmm, that's like about 60 years off. Women were considered people in 1929.
So what were they considered before that?
I don't even know. I don't think they even considered women important enough to matter, which is why we're discussing family structures today and the role of women in families.
It's interesting that they weren't even considered people. I knew that women would just get married and be housewives and cook and clean, but not even be people. That's another level.
I know because even just historically, women's roles were almost just seen as like a trade asset because you know how like fathers would be like, "Oh, if you marry my daughter, no, if you like, oh, how did it work? It's like if you let my son marry your daughter, I'll give you three cows." You know, that's how marriage usually worked. A woman was usually worth a couple cows and a pig, maybe if they're really cool. And they really weren't considered more than that and more than just like child bearers. So today we're just really going to talk about how that changed.
Yeah, I love to hear about how that changed. So when do you think about did that start to have a shift?
Well, one event particularly that a lot of people definitely mentioned was World War One, because of course all the men were off fighting and like dying, so the factory jobs were empty. There wasn't anyone to work in there, so the women would pick up those roles, and this is the first time women really enter the workforce. But it's really important to note that just because they enter the workforce doesn't mean that they were treated well in the workforce, right? They were paid a lot less. They were put in really dangerous conditions, but yet again that's still like the really first time they ever like worked. So this is really when family structures, well, mostly in like the west, started to change a lot. So that's like a super important event, which is leading us to all the stuff that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. Um, yeah, that was definitely the first step to people seeing that women aren't just childbearers, that they can do a lot of things that men can. And today there's been a lot of improvement in that. Every woman can create their own role in society, but traditional beliefs are still there in a lot of cultures and religions. Like women are
Mm-hmm.
expected to do as they're told. So if the marriage fails, for example, then she must have done something wrong. There's still that belief there for a lot of people.
Oh, definitely. Even in some cultures who believe that they're pretty progressive, you can tell that the way people treat divorced moms and divorced dads is super different. Like a single mom is usually seen as irresponsible. Like, oh, how could she let this happen? Blah, blah, how is she so irresponsible for the care of her child? But a single dad is like, oh, he stayed, he's so responsible, he's stepping up. And you could definitely see that there's a huge difference there because women are just expected to take care of kids, while fathers are praised for it.
Yeah, I definitely feel like even subconsciously for some families, they might think that they're being progressive, but there's still a lot of ideas that have been rooted there for centuries that people still believe in without even knowing.
And while you said that women were, different treated differently in marriage, one example of that is in marriage. I found a really interesting statistic, interesting in a bad way, which is that there's a huge difference between partners staying or getting divorced when they are sick. So when a woman is sick, 20.8% of the time the man will leave her. But when a man is sick, only 2.9% of the time will a woman leave him.
Oh, wow.
That
That is
is what
really unfair.
18%, and that's what one in five women who will be left once they have like a life-threatening disease when they need someone the most. And this was explained by the person who found the statistic that men weren't raised to be caregivers. So women were taught that they had to caregive, while men weren't. So when they come to a scenario where men do need to take of their sick wives, take care of them, they just leave because they don't expect that they have to take that burden, so they just leave. When women are more like ready to take that on.
And in many marriages, when you do your vows, you say, I will be with you in sickness and in health. So that's really interesting to me that more men left than women.
Yeah, they lied through that vow. They did not stay within sickness. some of the time they don't even stay in health. Most of the time, even their wife is perfectly healthy, amazing, long life together, happy. A lot of time, men will still leave their wives for like the new youngest girl, the freshly legal whole teenager, which is really creepy whenever I see it, especially in media.
Yeah, I think that definitely comes from how women were believed to just be, like you said, people who give birth, like vessels for babies, like we were talking about in kind of the past. But now it kind of evolved into if women look young, if they're young and healthy, then they're valuable. Yeah, having your partner be sick is a very difficult thing, but for more men to see it as a chance to leave, that's a really serious problem.
And like you said, women were expected to bear children. And I've seen a lot of discourse online where men are like, I think age 17 to 20 is the prime age to date a woman because that is prime childbearing age, which grosses me out. And there's also discourse saying, like, oh, men like a woman with childbearing hips. Why are women still seen as just childbearers when it's like 2023, right? This conversation is old, it's outdated. We need to stop having it, but like it's still being had, and I just think that's so icky and gross and yucky.
All these things just kind of expose that marriage is still shown as the responsibility being on women, while it should be an equal part them thing, right?
A lot of men, I want to say, have a lot of things that are like, oh, if I make more money, if I like support the family, then you have to do everything else. You have to clean, you have to take care of the kids, blah, blah, blah. But women aren't just expected to do that, right? They're expected to change their last name. They're expected to give up their career, have a child, even if they don't quit their job, right? They are giving up a huge portion of their career, going on maternity leave, like even sometimes giving up education to have that child, go through like horrible pain of just having that child, and just always putting her dreams and goals and career second to her husband. Women are giving up more than the 50-50 that men kind of think marriage is, which I feel like is one thing that feminism is pushing to change.
I think there's definitely been certain improvements to that. Like, I know statistically a lot less women have kids nowadays because there are other options. Culturally, a lot of people have become more accepting of women finding their own paths, being career women, or there's also economical reasons. Like, it's harder to afford to have more kids now. So I guess that's also a part of the reason why they're having less kids.
Something interesting that you said was that there are a lot of women going into careers more. But I have noticed, and a lot of people talk about this too, some men tend to get insecure when their wife or partner makes more money. So they'll start putting this partner down. They'll start like being more like discouraging to them and stuff, because a lot of it just dates back to many years ago where it's like a control factor. Even if right now it's less like politically correct to say that men control their wives, it is still inherently like a thought that is still passed down. So this kind of comes with last name. I don't know, there's a pretty popular clip going around the internet the past few weeks where Ethan Payne, the British YouTuber from The Sideman, and his girlfriend Faith Kelly were on a podcast, and she said that he wouldn't marry her because she wanted to go by Faith Kelly Payne. She wanted to keep her last name. And he was saying, like, if we're gonna get married, you need to fully commit. You need to take my name. And she was saying, like, I am taking your name. I'm just also keeping mine. And he just got super heated over this. They had a huge argument, like, live on the podcast. And I think that goes to show how people still see marriage as the woman becoming, like, the man's, like, property. Because, like, it's a name. Why is this so important?
When I was listening to another podcast, they were talking about how traditionally you'd have your dad walking down the aisle. And that actually comes from you being the dad's property, moving to becoming the husband's property. I still think that, like, your dad walking down the aisle, it's all a cute thing, but like you said, there are so many traditional things that we do which rooted from, like, ownership of women property.
And a lot of this is justified by people saying, oh, well, the man is making more money. The men are providing for the family, so they should be able to have the kind of ownership. And I feel like this ideology is really flawed. Because first of all, like you said, more women are having careers. A lot of women are making more. And also, even if there is like a pay difference there, that still doesn't mean like you own your wife, you own your daughters and stuff like that. That's just again so outdated, and we need to stop putting that in the spotlight.
I think it is that fear that their value is being taken away because their value traditionally is to be the breadwinner, and the woman's
Mm.
value is to have kids and take care of the house. But if we break those traditional values, then there won't be that problem anymore.
I think it definitely is insecurity too. Like we talked a little bit about toxic masculinity in our Andrew Tate episode, and I can definitely see how if you're friends with a bunch of toxic masculine men and you make less money than your wife, that could be like something you can make fun of. So I can see why it would come from a point where they're like insecure about not being the breadwinner, but I think this is still like a social issue where that's the root of the problem. That's what we have to deal with, not the woman making more.
For sure. Okay.
Sorry. And one thing that this can lead to, which is all this financial insecurity, this like built up resentment, is again a lot of abuse. So this month is Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. So we really want to take the time and kind of spread awareness to this.
Yeah, and recognize the horrible things that so many women have to go through. Like I know in our area, there's a lot of nonprofits and companies that try to help these women get out of their situations, which I've been looking into recently. And there's definitely a lot of types of different abuse, which they've been talking about. There's physical abuse, where women have a harder time leaving a man if they're abused because of their kids and the stigma around physical abuse. And also not wanting to ruin that man's reputation, but there's a lot of manipulation that comes with that abuse.
And a lesser known form of abuse that is so super crucial is financial abuse. So if somebody does live in like this traditional family structure, let's say, where the woman is at home taking care of 6 kids, she doesn't have a career, she doesn't work, the man pays for the house, pays for the bills, has the job. Now if this man leaves, he takes the house, he takes all the bills, he doesn't provide the support. Now this woman who doesn't have a job, doesn't have an education or the resources to get a job, is now left to take care of herself and these 6 kids. So that is a huge form of financial abuse, and this can be used with physical abuse. If a woman is being physically abused, they sometimes are not able to just get up and leave, as some people try to tell abuse victims, why don't you just leave? Because they can't. They have no means to leave because either this man is controlling their money, they have access to their bank account, or they just don't have the resources to go. So there are many different types of abuse, and it's super important to keep an eye out for all of these things. And let's say that a woman did successfully leave, right? If she was able to get the means to get out of the marriage, if she had the means to separate herself, there's still a lot of stigma that will happen post divorce. So we can see all around us that men have it easier than divorced women. Like, if you see those videos of people going on Tinder and they're making fun of men's Tinder bios, they're all usually like, if you're divorced, if you have kids, don't hit me up. Because a woman who has kids and was divorced and has had past marriages are often seen as like used goods, which is super dehumanizing, by the way. And they're less likely to be more accepted. Well, that's not the same for men.
I think a lot of traditional cultures as well look down on divorce, seeing that it's a really bad thing in their cultures. Like I know that there is the Southern Baptist Convention, which is a very large group in America, and they declare that wives should submit themselves graciously to their husband's leadership. So when a woman gets divorced to a man, and it's more common for a woman to initiate the divorce, then their family will kind of ostracize them and look at them as having done a sin or a bad deed when they left their husband.
Yeah, I can definitely notice that, again, with the stigma between divorced women and divorced men. If a woman leaves, they're often seen as like disfaithful and like unloyal and like they're just like problematic. But they don't often realize that there are factors behind divorce. Again, oftentimes domestic abuse is a huge factor in a woman getting up and leaving. because it's not hard. It's not, I mean, it's not easy to just get divorced. It's not easy to leave a life like that, especially if you have kids. So instead of like judging someone for getting divorced, you really need to think about why. Because it's a huge decision. They probably beat themselves up over it. They don't need the judgment on top of that.
Yeah, and I think that when this type of generational trauma is pushed upon the next generation, it's just going to keep going. What's going to happen when they end up having their kids get a divorce? Breaking that line is definitely a hard thing to do, but it has to be done.
Because a lot of feminists do say that the patriarchal beliefs start in early childhood, they start in the household. For example, if a boy grows up with his dad going out and earning all the money and his mom taking care of him and his siblings and cooking for him, then gets ingrained in his mind, right? That is what he believes should be right. This is because sexism is learned, right? Sexism is not inherited. You aren't born thinking that women should be caretakers. The patriarchy is not, you're not born with that. We can see that through, for example, the Barbie movie. When Ken learned about the patriarchy, he was not born with knowledge of the patriarchy. He had to inherit that from somewhere. This is the same with kids. This is the same with kids in a family setting, and it's also for girls. You know, a girl might grow up thinking, oh, I have to get married young, I have to have a bunch of kids, I need to know how to take care of the kids, instead of pursuing maybe their own goals and dreams. So I think if we want to change these kind of family structures and these kind of ideas, we do need to talk about what happens in the household.
I think you're definitely right about that because feminism is about equality. It's about having equal parts in marriages. And family structures are still changing, especially today. Like women wanting a domestic lifestyle or a working lifestyle. And I think introducing kids to these different pathways early on, rather than just saying, you're a little girl, so you're going to be growing up to be a caregiver, you're a man, so you're going to go to work. These things have to be broken because we're not living in that time anymore.
I think that's really important to mention that we're not saying that you can't have a domestic lifestyle. You can't get married young and have a bunch of kids and live a happy farm life, right? But it's just important that young girls know that that's not the only option. They need to know that you can have a career, you can go on and just be single if you want. You don't have to base your life around marriage, which is something that is taught a lot, even in schools, even if it's like subconsciously mentioned, like, oh, you know, your mom cooks and your dad comes home from work and is so happy. That stuff is just taught so early on, and yeah, like Isabella said, there are so many different options now, and we need to spread more awareness of that.
Yeah, marriage is so glorified oftentimes, and when you're learning about it in elementary school, a lot of teachers might say, like you said, oh, the woman will have a nice time baking at home, and then the dad will go to work. But that's just not true for a lot of kids now. So I think that having role models who have a domestic lifestyle, have a working lifestyle, who don't have kids, who have kids, that's such an important thing to have.
I think that's something I've noticed too with where we live. A lot of our friends almost have completely different family structures, right? Some have step siblings, some have half siblings, some parents are divorced, some parents are together, some have a bunch of siblings, some are the only children, right? There's so many different family structures, and we need to reduce the stigma on all of these. There's no one correct family structure, and even within like a two-parent household, there's no correct way things run. There's no correct like cookie cutter family that you can get.
For sure. Your family structure is never wrong, and that type of diversity should be accepted. Like for my family, both my mom and my brother work, and they take turns cooking, and that's definitely a unique structure.
And for me too, my mom never cooked. It was usually my dad or my grandparents. And my mom was the one going out and working and starting her own business and being the breadwinner. So that's why when I grew up, I never really like expected that I had to get married that quick. Cause like seeing my mom do all that and seeing how my dad was still okay with cooking and like helping, and like how my grandparents are also a big help, it just really spreads awareness to how it's okay. People grow up differently and they all end up great. Because change is good, opportunities are good, options are good, and freedom is good.
The freedom to choose.
The freedom to choose.